On the plains of northern Castile lies the small town of Paredes de Nava. It was here, sometime around 1488, that Alonso Berruguete was born. Perhaps the best thing that the town had to offer was his father, the famous painter Pedro Berruguete. And in the town's main church, there still survives a retablo, or an altarpiece, that contains some of the finest examples of his paintings. These are paintings that show great refinement and that betray the influence of artists from Northern Europe. In 1504, Pedro Berruguete passed away, and soon after, his son Alonso decided to travel to Italy, where he would spend the better part of a decade. He's first recorded in Rome in 1508. We know that he met Michelangelo. At some point, he was granted access to the Sistine Chapel, where he studied Michelangelo's frescoes on the ceiling. But it was Florence that became his base of operations, and it was there that he really flourished as a painter. And we know from paintings like the one behind me of Salome that he was very much in the vanguard of the movement called Mannerism. This was an elegant style of painting that came into vogue in Florence right at this moment in time. After spending this decade in Italy, he decided to go back to Spain. And in 1518, he's recorded in Saragossa, where he's immediately hired by the new King Charles I to be his court painter. And then he follows Charles, now the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, to the city of Valladolid, which had become the de facto capital of Charles's realms across Europe. And it's there in the very next year, 1523, that he receives his first documented commission for a retablo, the work that's behind me. It was carved for a monastery that lies about 20 miles to the south of Valladolid, the monastery of Nuestra Señora de la Mejorada, near the town of Olmedo. 1526, he completes that retablo, and within several months, he had received the commission for what would turn out to be his great masterpiece in the field of retablos, the retablo here at the Benedictine monastery of San Benito el Real. The altarpiece was deinstalled during the 19th century and moved in various sections to the city's sculpture museum. But imagine walking into the church during the 16th century and seeing the great space of the apse filled with this towering, gilded altarpiece. He wanted to turn the apse wall into a shimmering mosaic of gilded figures, imploring the worshiper to join in a headlong rush towards salvation. Berruguete's Retablo Mayor of San Benito stands in sharp contrast to the kind of altarpieces that were being produced in Castile up until the point when he returned from Italy. You see the influence of Gothic architecture in the pointed arches, the minute tracery, and you also see the characteristic style of sculpture being practiced prior to Berruguete, a style that's characterized by stiff figures and very generic features. With Berruguete, he's doing something very, very different in the way that the bodies torque, the way that the figures move. He's drawing on the expressive figure style of Michelangelo. He was able to bring the sacred stories to life and make them perhaps more visceral for the viewers than what they had been seeing with the Gothic sculptures. Even as Berruguete was working on the Retablo Mayor of San Benito, he was receiving commissions from across Castile for other monumental retablos. One of the finest exists in the university town of Salmanca. It adorns the altar area of a beautiful Gothic chapel in one of the colleges. It's important always to realize when contemplating the works of Berruguete that these sculptures and these paintings were meant to be seen at an incredible distance. Berruguete knew that he could loosen his techniques, loosen the precision with which he was painting, with which he was sculpting, because the worshipper way down below was still receiving the impact of his vision, a painterly vision that very much speaks to his abilities as first and foremost a designer. Toledo Cathedral is where Alonso Berruguete sealed his reputation as the most important sculptor active in Castile during the first half of the 16th century. In 1537, he was invited to come help complete the choir stalls in the cathedral. There, he executed a series of exquisite reliefs in walnut that are among his most expressive and dynamic figures. A standout example is the figure of Job, and the way his body tenses and the way he looks to be launching himself through the air. Berruguete achieves a forcefulness of dramatic expression unprecedented in the sculpture of his time. As Berruguete and his assistants worked on the wooden seatbacks, they were also engaged on the alabaster reliefs above, and again, with each relief, he continued to demonstrate his incredible powers of imagination with figures like the Methuselah, who seemed to be leaping out in space in a totally extraordinary manner. Their success led to the invitation to carve an enormous alabaster group of the Transfiguration of Christ that crowns the entire choir. It's an incredibly dynamic work, showing the moment when Christ is enveloped in light, his apostles cowering at the base of the mountain, recoiling in shock at the vision before them. I'm standing here in the chapel of the Hospital Tavera, the site of Alonso Berruguete's last great creation, the marble tomb of the powerful Archbishop of Toledo, Cardinal Juan Pardo de Tavera. In 1541, the cardinal founded this hospital. He would end up dying 4 years later, not seeing the completion of the structure. In 1554, the cardinal's heirs asked Alonso Berruguete to create a sumptuous tomb to commemorate the fallen cardinal. Berruguete immediately turned to commissioning the marble to be quarried in Italy and imported to Toledo, and over the course of the next 6-7 years, he worked with his assistants to carve the magnificent tomb. In the fall of 1561, just as Alonso Berruguete was bringing to conclusion his great tomb of Cardinal Tavera, he took ill, and he sought remedy here in the Hospital Tavera. We know from payment receipts that he asked for a piece of canvas on which he could execute a painting of Christ. We don't know whether it was ever executed, but a matter of days after receiving that piece of canvas, he passed away. Berruguete was nearly 70 years old when he passed away. He had been working in Spain since his return from Italy for more than 40 years. And if, in those final days of his life, he had the opportunity to look back over his career, he surely basked in the knowledge that he had achieved near mythic status across the Iberian Peninsula.